I were to shuffle a deck of cards, it's more than 1 in 1 trillion, 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 trillion in a chance that I shuffle it and it ends up in the order that it ends up in. We might then say that there must be an intelligent actor that put those cards in that order. However, it's just a random shuffling of 52 cards that came up in a very improbable result. Now, obviously, there's no intelligent design behind that. Obviously, it's just a random occurrence. It's extremely unlikely, but the law of large numbers tells us that these sort of things do happen, and the fact that they happen isn't necessarily miraculous. And because it's not miraculous, we don't need to speculate about these things that don't make any kind of physical sense.
I haven't detected a question, so you
my question
that you want to make.
So I'm just questioning your argument here that just because it's unlikely that we're here, there must be some kind of miracle that caused it to happen.
Oh, all I'm saying is, in my observation of reality, life comes from life. It does not come from non-life. Therefore, it's more plausible for me to believe, in the beginning, a living being, God, than it is for me to believe, in the beginning, inanimate matter produces animate life. Secondly, from all of my observation, the rational comes from the rational. The rational does not come from the non-rational or the irrational. July 1883, Charles Darwin wrote a letter to a man named Mr. Graham. In this letter, Charles Darwin writes, "In light of the fact that my brain is simply a highly developed monkey's brain, why should I trust my brain to tell me the truth about reality? Would you trust the thoughts of a monkey? I respect Darwin. He was struggling with epistemological nihilism. Why do you trust your mind to tell you the truth about reality? The reason that I trust my mind to tell me the truth about reality is because I'm convinced that behind my mind is a rational being, a creator God. So, life comes from life, not from non-life. Reason comes from reason, not from non-reason or the irrational. Consciousness comes from consciousness, not from unconsciousness. So that is why it's more plausible for me to believe God exists than it is for me to believe there's no God. Does that make any sense?
I follow what you're saying. I think I have a number of problems along the way. The first of which is that you're saying now that God is a living being.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, does that mean that God can die?
Because God is eternal, all-powerful, self-sustaining? No, God cannot die.
All right, so then what does it mean to be alive?
What does it mean to be alive?
Uh-huh.
It means to be an animate being who is able to produce, to be creative.
Okay, so death is not a necessity to be alive. You don't have to die.
No.
All right. So have you ever experienced something that was alive that never died? Have you ever experienced that?
No.
So then would you say that all living things must die because you've never experienced a living thing that has not died?
No.
All right.
I've got to be open to the possibility that there is a being who is eternal.
Okay. All right. Okay. We'll go with that for a moment. All right. So then now that you're saying that even though you haven't experienced a living being that has not died, we still have to be open to that possibility. Obviously, you think that there is a living being that has not died. All right. I've never experienced life coming from non-life, but I haven't experienced everything, and I must know that it is possible for life to come from non-life. And it's not out of reason to believe that life came from non-life, especially if you're a materialist or a physicalist and you believe that most things can be explained or all things can be explained by natural phenomenon. It's no more of a jump in logic to say that life came from non-life than it is to say that there's a living being that cannot die. They're the same type of logic. Do you understand?
A very good point. But no, I strongly disagree. My observation is life does not come from non-life.
No, I understand.
The reason does not come from irrational or the non-reason.
Okay.
Therefore, it is more plausible for me to believe that we come from a living being, that our rational minds are gifts from a rational being, than it is reasonable for me to believe that we come from non-life.
So then by that same logic, I find it more plausible to believe that if there is a God and he is living, that he will die and therefore he's not eternal.
That's not true.
How do you
Because
know
when we talk about God, we're talking about a being of a radically different order than Homo sapien or an animal. Radically different when we begin to think about the vastness of the universe. It's like looking at a beaver dam. Obviously, when you look at a beaver dam, you know that it wasn't stream bringing sticks down that made the beaver dam. But then when you go to the Golden Gate Bridge, you know, the beavers didn't make the Golden Gate Bridge. Why? Because the level of complex design is such that it requires more than a beaver's brain to put it together. It takes a human mind. Then when you go from the Golden Gate Bridge to the universe, you are taking such a quantum leap. It's incredible. And it demands a mind that is far superior to the human mind.
I don't think that that's true. Look, you're applying double standards here. The difference between your side and my side is that when I come to any kind of improbability, right, you tell me that my side is irrational and that it doesn't make sense. However, when we point out an irrationality in your side of the logic, you take this double standard and say that we're talking about something that can't be explained. We're talking about something that we can't understand. We're talking about something that is of higher order, higher rationality, however you want to word it. And then it's sort of a cop-out against the argument. What I'm saying is that there's an imparallel between what I'm saying and what you're saying, and thus I can't effectively have a point with you if you're just going to tell me that when we find a flaw in your logic, it can be explained away. But if there's a flaw in my logic because you haven't experienced it, therefore it mustn't make any sense. All I'm saying is that, look, if we analyze it in the way that you're analyzing it, and I'm applying the same kind of logic that you're applying, I'm not trying to have any kind of sleight of hand here, right? You're just saying that you've never experienced life coming from non-life. I'm saying that I've never experienced a living being that's not died, right? And if God isn't eternal, then it's obviously not the God that's been written about in the Christian Bible, for instance. Okay, so we might as well just evenly doubt the fact that life could come from non-life, just as much as we doubt that the Bible talks about the real God, if there is a God in the first place.
You can conclude that all you want. I'm saying that my experience is...
I'm saying the same thing. Yeah, you understand that I'm applying the same logic that you are?
No.
In my experience, I've never seen a living being that's...
Yeah, I understand that point, but that's not the entirety of my point about God. A big part of my point about God is there has to be a mind that is so superior, not just to the beaver's mind, but to the human mind in creating a universe, that I've got to be open to a being who is so much bigger than I am. It's incredible. And that also this being could be eternal.
Because I've heard you over here for the last couple of days, and a lot of things that you base yourself upon is moral absolutism. So, in fact, I do consider myself a moral relativist. So, obviously, because I'm a moral relativist, I do not need God in my life. So then I just have a couple of questions that I want to direct towards you concerning moral relativism. Okay, you say morality is absolute, but my first question to you is, and one of the favorite examples that you like to use is there a time when the rape of a woman is acceptable? Well, my answer to that would be, well, not more than a couple of centuries ago, raping of a woman was considered to be spoils of war, which meant that until somebody stood up and said, hey, we should not do this anymore, raping of a woman for spoils of war was considered an acceptable practice. So my question to you is if morality is absolute, then why does it change?
Great question. When I say that there are a few moral absolutes, I am not saying that everybody follows those absolutes. Obviously, God has given us a free will, which means that obviously we can rationalize evil, or we can accept our society's definition that rape is okay as a spoil of war, or slavery is okay because it greases the economic wheels of our culture. But that doesn't change the fact that we have consciences that tie us into objective morals. And the only way there can be an objective moral is if there is some mind prior to the human mind that has defined what that moral is. If there's no mind prior to the human mind who defines what objective morality is, then it's obviously people who define morality, which means it's relative depending upon which person you're talking to.
Okay, then, but then you seem to talk from a perspective where you're saying, but I have reached this moral absolute. Or, my question to you is then, what keeps people, like, decades from now looking back upon this time period and saying, that person was not living out what's morally absolute? What keeps him from doing that? Because at this time period a couple of centuries ago where that was a accepted practice, people didn't think of it as anything wrong. So obviously you don't think of some of the things that you support as wrong. So what keeps people from saying that in the future?
Okay. I am convinced that just because I don't think something's wrong does not make it wrong. In other words, I'm convinced that I don't create reality. The challenge for me is to get in touch with reality. Let's say that I think that racism is good. That doesn't make racism good, just because I think that. My thoughts can be wrong. I am convinced that all people have equal value, but all ideas do not have equal value. Some ideas are true, other ideas are false. And the idea that racism is good, I am convinced, is a false idea. Wrong idea.
Okay. But then in that context, so let's bring up like a major moral issue, which is abortion, between the choice of a woman and the life of a child. Like, how do you determine which one is right based on moral absolutes?
Okay, great example. Abortion. If abortion is simply removing excess skin, I think it's hard to make a case that abortion is wrong. If abortion is murdering a child, I think the majority of us would agree that murdering children is not good. So the first thing you have to do is you have to answer the question, what is abortion? Is it simply removing excess skin? Nothing wrong with removing excess skin. Or is abortion terminating a human life motivated by inconvenience?